We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to the award-winning Basketball History 101, part of Sports History Network. I am your host, Rick Loayza, and this is a podcast where we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. We are bringing old-school basketball to a new-school audience. And today we bring you the story of FIBA, the International Federation of Basketball. Of course, in English, the acronym would be IFB, but the official name of the federation is in French. And the official name used to be the Fédération Internationale de Basketball Amateur. In French, that spells FIBA or FIBA. So what exactly do they do, and what is their authority? Sometimes when I come up with an idea for an episode here on Basketball History 101, I am really trying to answer a question that I have always had. As I researched this particular answer, I decided to share it with you as part of this podcast, and that is how I came across this story. As a kid growing up in the United States, I could not have cared less about FIBA or what they did, since NBA players were not allowed to play in international competitions. That meant that watching our college players compete at the Olympics was not that interesting for me, since I was not familiar with that many college players, at least not back then. The last Olympics that was played before NBA players were allowed to participate was the 1988 Games in Seoul, South Korea. That American team was led by David Robinson, Danny Manning, Hersey Hawkins, Stacey Augmon, and Dan Marley. At the time, I did not know who any of those players were, and that is a shame on me. And I know who all those players are now, of course. Now, FIBA was founded in 1932 in Geneva, Switzerland, but it did not have broad authority. The organization was created, but in a sense, they had to convince everybody else that they were the best ones to oversee international basketball. The International Olympic Committee officially recognized basketball as a sport in 1930 in preparation for basketball to be included as a full medal sport in 1936. And by the way, now if you want to hear the full story of the 1936 Olympics, the first ones that featured basketball, go back and listen to episode 47. Those were the Olympics held in Berlin under the dictatorship of Adolf Hitler. Anyway, up until FIBA was created, there were international basketball competitions, but they all came under the authority of the International Amateur Handball Federation. After all, someone needed to jump in and organize various international tournaments around the world, and the Handball Federation was willing to step up and take the lead. Team handball includes the concept of dribbling, similar to basketball, so they were the obvious choice. 8 countries came together to form FIBA, and those countries were Argentina, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Portugal, Romania, and Switzerland. In 1936, they named James Naismith, the inventor, as the honorary president of FIBA, and gradually they took over basketball oversight from the Handball Federation and began organizing international competitions on their own. Starting in 1950, they organized the Basketball World Championships, today known as the Basketball World Cup. The competition is held every 4 years to determine the best national team in the world. It alternates with the Olympics so that one of the competitions is happening every 2 years, and they started the Women's World Championship in 1953. The organization was firmly in charge of international basketball since the late 1930s. They create the rules, hire and train the referees, set rules for eligibility, and then otherwise organize qualifying tournaments and championship tournaments. But the rules that they set do not apply only to international competitions, like the Olympics and Basketball World Cup. Their rules apply to all professional leagues around the world except the NBA. That is what allows for international championships between professional teams. Similar to Champions League for European football, basketball has its own version of that competition called the Euro Cup, where professional teams from all over Europe compete for a continental championship. With FIBA, all national teams and professional teams have to follow their rules. The only league that is part of FIBA which has the authority to make its own rules is the NBA. For decades, they chose to not become members of FIBA because they did not want to follow the international rules for the game. That is one of the stipulations in becoming a member of FIBA. But all of that changed in 1989. FIBA would no longer be the organization in charge of amateur basketball, they would be the organization in charge of all basketball. Well, this is a good place to take a break, and I'll be right back with a story of how the NBA joined FIBA, which paved the way for NBA players to be included in international competitions.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorium Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.
Welcome back to the show, and let us continue with how the NBA joined FIBA in 1989. This was 1 year after the United States had a disappointing result in the 1988 Olympics. The Americans lost to the Soviets in the semifinals and ended up with the bronze medal. While that was a factor in allowing NBA players to represent the United States for the 1992 Olympics, it was just one factor, and not even the main factor. The main factor was that FIBA realized that some of the very best international players were beginning to sign NBA contracts and were no longer eligible for FIBA-sanctioned events like the Olympics and the World Cup. In other words, the players that everybody wanted to see were no longer going to be able to participate in those tournaments. Now, we are talking about players like Detlef Schrempf from Germany, Vlade Divac from Serbia, Drazen Petrovic from Croatia, and Sarunas Marciulionis from Lithuania. These guys were all in the NBA and bona fide international superstars. But under the old rules, they could no longer play in the Olympics. And things were going to get worse for FIBA as every year more and more of the top international players were moving to the NBA because of the large salaries. FIBA tournaments would likely become far less significant if the best international players were not allowed to play. And that's when FIBA got the idea to begin letting NBA players participate in international events. After all, professional players from every other league in the world were allowed to play. Why not the NBA? Why was the NBA so special? With the shift to allowing NBA players to participate, the organization officially dropped the word amateur from their name. So technically, they are today known as Fédération Internationale de Basketball. And since everyone still called them FIBA, they actually just kept the acronym FIBA. Anyway, FIBA also realized that the TV ratings for the Olympics and the Basketball World Cup would go through the roof if NBA players from all countries were allowed to participate. They realized that they would become less relevant unless they changed their eligibility rules. But in order to allow NBA players to participate, they needed a partnership of the NBA. They already had partnerships with every significant professional league around the world except the NBA. The NBA would need to become a former member of FIBA in order for its players to be allowed to play. So FIBA came calling on the NBA, particularly the commissioner at the time, David Stern. Now, Stern was not that interested in joining FIBA, basically because the NBA did not need FIBA, but FIBA definitely needed the NBA. So David Stern essentially played hard to get and presented every reason why the partnership would not be good for the NBA. But FIBA was persistent. Eventually, the NBA entered into a special agreement that made the NBA a member of FIBA, but also exempted the NBA from the FIBA game rules. They are still the only FIBA-sanctioned league in the world that is allowed to make their own rules for the game. And again, the situation was that FIBA needed the NBA way more than the NBA needed FIBA. The result of the NBA becoming a formal member of FIBA is that NBA players were now eligible for all international competitions, and this was a massive game changer. Some of the top players from around the world could now go to the NBA and still represent their countries at the Olympics and the World Cup. It was very freeing. Now let us look at a particular player as an example. The player's name is Oscar Schmidt from Brazil. Schmidt is in the Hall of Fame, by the way. He is the all-time world leading scorer, having scored over 49,000 points in his professional career, played mostly in Italy. Schmidt was a good enough player that he could have been competing in the NBA back in the early 1980s. He was a sharpshooter from the outside. His game would have translated quite well to the NBA. Well, the primary reason that Schmidt never played in the NBA is because it was really important to him to be able to play for his country. He ended up playing in the Olympics 5 times, and he also led Brazil to a gold medal in the 1987 Pan Am Games, where they defeated the United States in a tournament held in the United States. So from now on, guys like Schmidt would no longer have to choose between playing in the NBA and continuing to play for country. But the next question was, would the American NBA players even want to play in the international competitions? Just because they were eligible did not mean that they would do it. NBA players, especially the best ones, play deep into the playoffs every year. Between the regular season and the playoffs, a player will play approximately 100 games in 8 months. Most players were going to want to rest their bodies and prepare for the following season. Playing a summer tournament was going to be physically taxing, and it did take some convincing. In 1991, when Team USA announced that they would field a team of NBA players for the 1992 Olympics, one of the first players to sign up was Magic Johnson. He then convinced Larry Bird and Michael Jordan to play as well, and once they had Jordan, everyone else wanted to sign up to be part of the team. It became an honor for NBA players to represent their countries at the Olympics and World Cup. The goal that FIBA wanted to accomplish was achieved. Back in 1992, the first time that NBA players competed at the Olympics, there were only 4 NBA players in the entire tournament outside of Team USA. At the Tokyo Games last year, there were so many NBA players everywhere. Every team had at least one NBA player on their roster. It felt like I recognized the starting 5 from nearly every single country. Spain, France, Argentina, and Australia each fielded teams at the Olympics with at least 7 or 8 NBA players, and some of them were NBA All-Stars. Interest around the world is amazing for these competitions because everyone knows that the absolute best players in the world are going to compete in it. It makes it much more interesting when your country's best are out there and not some second-rate team. Today, FIBA is as strong as ever as they govern basketball around the world. And personally, I love watching the Olympics and World Cup basketball. I love seeing all the great American players from different NBA teams getting together for a common goal. I also love seeing some of my favorite international NBA players like Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, and Giannis Antetokounmpo competing for their own countries. Also, it is summer basketball. The off-season is a time when normally I would only get to watch NBA Summer League, but every other summer I get to watch the best compete for their country. International basketball is as strong as ever. Well, that does it for today. Join us next week when we share the story of how the field is selected for the NCAA tournament every year. We are going to go back to college and see how March Madness is put together. That's next time on Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. There you will find shorter historical posts as well as comments and discussion starters on today's game. I'll also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories from the past. Take care, and see you soon.
It was just another ordinary day in the offices of the Pittsburgh Guardian newspaper circa 1924. But for Marla Delft, assistant editor, everything was about to change. For she was about to discover the awesome attractiveness of Row 1 brand retro sports paraphernalia items thanks to Orville Mulligan, sports writer.
And there it is.
Wow, Orville, that's really the bee's knees.
Isn't it just? A poster-sized replica of the actual 1909 World Series program cover.
I can see that. But where did you get it? And where'd you get it framed?
I ordered it from the Row 1 website, where over 6,000 items of sports memorabilia from the 1880s to the 1990s are available for reproduction, in multiple sizes and in several different materials, with over a dozen styles of frame to choose from for prints like this.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Delft would love to put up more of these in the office. But I'm equally as sure they're beyond this newspaper's budget.
Not at all, my dear Marla. See for yourself. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. Oh my, these are good prices. Oh, and look at this stuff. Oklahoma-Nebraska football, college basketball art, Michael Jordan items.
And so
retro
it was that
sports
Marla Delft
advertisement
discovered the
flowers.
splendiferous magic of Row 1 sports memorabilia, arts, and prints. You can too by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROW1 today for access to the full Row 1 catalog of gallery prints and gifts like t-shirts, long-sleeve shirts, telephone cases, coffee mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Act today for 15% discount off all prints with coupon code SHN15 and 20% off all other items with coupon code SHN20 at checkout. And keep your dial locked to the Sports History Network for the exciting chronicles of the 1920 sports world in Orville Mulligan, sports writer. Coming soon.